Hey everybody, Professor Start here, checking in as we keep rolling through our poetry course. So we have just finished up the first due date as I'm recording this for Unit 2, and now we have, and what you'll find is there, what I'm suggesting and what you'll probably find as a good kind of rhythm to get into, is that we finished up, right, this due date, and I'm recording this on Thursday morning. So now you've done the main work for Unit 2, but perhaps not any of the reply components, so you still have a couple days to work on that. But I wouldn't then wait until after this date to jump into Unit 3. So you're always potentially, if you haven't finished up all of the stuff for Unit 2, or whatever unit we're in, you might get into the habit of sort of finishing up this part in parallel with starting the next one, so you have a foot in both units a little bit. Now, of course, if lots of people are finishing work like here, even earlier than this due date, then any replies can get done pretty quickly, even before or sort of on this date, right? So you're not locked into these as dates that you have to wait for necessarily. But as we get deeper into the course, right, you need to sort of figure out your own timing and schedule and stuff like that. So you're not waiting until the last minute on whatever this date is to jump in and figure out what you've got to do, and then you're not maybe reading directions carefully because you're in a rush and you sort of panic a little bit. So time management, like I said right at the start of our course, is really, really important. Okay. So I'm going to walk us through our next two units because they are obviously connected here. Before I do that, though, I'm just going to jump in to Unit 2. So hopefully you did our little survey here, or my little survey. I'm interested, like I explained, in why people take a particular course, whether it's this one or other courses that I'm teaching as part of our LIT program here at COD. So why take the course, but also how the delivery format plays into it. Whether people prefer online, face-to-face, alternate, term lengths, the traditional 16-hour, 12-week, even shorter 8-week. And in a case like ours, because this particular class is only offered in the online 12-week format, right, you don't exactly have a choice, but I'm still interested to know if delivery format matters, if you have a preference, or truthfully, it doesn't really matter at all. It's just the course itself that you're interested in. Okay, so we had lots of work done in our slideshow here, right? Defining a whole bunch of our different terms. I tried to clean up some of the slides, just that were getting really too big for the pages. But yeah, it looks really good. If you ended up waiting so long to get in here and there were no terms left to define, I even added a few at the end. What I would invite you to do is provide new examples to existing terms that have a definition. So you're still doing 3. You can still post to the discussion board about which 3 you did, but in this case you're just providing an additional example for something. Then we also had our poetry Padlet, which is a fun little tool. Lots of people did this really well. Kind of finding poetry out there in the world. It's amazing how many places we find it and the different forms that it takes, whether it's like a couple people found graffiti, little sort of notes on the fridge, or stuff that you just sort of find right out there in the world. Very good, very good. Just make sure, and you can do this, or even if you have to email me, make sure that you provided your name, like Carly, Marissa, Jackie, Rebecca, Jaden, all did, so I can assign the grade for what you posted. But it looks like there's a few people, because the system is set up where you don't have to like sign in necessarily, which is just a hassle. If you don't like give me a name, then like for this one, for example, the one on the very edge, I can't tell who did that. So if you did it, email me so I know, or like go back in and add a comment so we have your name attached to them. Okay, so yeah, look at these. They're really cool, right? And it's sort of surprising how poetry is like, I don't know if it's everywhere, but it is kind of everywhere, right? It's all over the place. Even though if you ask the average person, like, do you ever read poetry? They'd be like, nah, that stuff is weird. Well, it's not weird. It's like all over the place right in front of us all the time. If we only think of it in the sort of most traditional, dusty old book, dead white guy format, then yeah, it is sort of hidden. But if we think about it in this broader way, then yeah, it's all over the place. I love this one too. Okay, so that was the main work for Unit 2, providing definitions, or if you couldn't find a word, doing further examples, our poetry Padlet. And now this exercise, the definitions exercise, also has a reply component asking you to look at some definitions and then reply to somebody's post about the terms that they defined, hopefully finding one that maybe you didn't know or you kind of had a sense of, but they articulated it really well, or they provided a really surprising example that you hadn't thought of that exactly in those terms before. So we do have that reply component. So that's the bulk of Unit 2 that we've sort of wrapped up here. So let's look at Units 3 and 4. So part of our course has us thinking about poetic forms, and probably the most common or the most recognizable for people is the sonnet, right? Because we all had to read Shakespeare at some point, and so that name usually is associated with the sonnet form. There's even there's two basic kinds of sonnets. There's a Shakespearean, right, named for the guy, or sometimes called the Elizabethan or English sonnet, and then there's an Italian, or what's sometimes called a Petrarchan sonnet, named for Petrarch, sort of like the equivalent of the Shakespeare. A person who, if he didn't invent the form, then he sort of like popularized it in his time period. So that's sort of what we're thinking about right here. We're reading a bunch of sonnets. I recommend reading them out loud because often, especially more contemporary ones or like this Wordsworth sonnet, you can read it, and unless you're aware of it being a sonnet, it can sound so sort of like not formal or almost like conversational that you don't even notice that it's in the sonnet format. Now, some are going to be obvious, or you just know, like Shakespeare. But others aren't so obvious, and if this weren't assigned as part of like the sonnets unit of our class, you might not even realize. Billy Collins, a contemporary poet, he was poet laureate for a while very recently, writes a sonnet about sonnets, kind of making fun of them a little bit, and his invokes Petrarch, right, of the Petrarchan sonnet. So you can look at Shakespearean sonnet form on the Wikipedia page. You can look at the Petrarchan on the Wikipedia page here. They share some commonalities, but there are some pretty important differences. I don't spend a lot of time like explaining them as part of our course because you can find explanations all over the web, and they're pretty elaborate sometimes. In this unit and in the next one, you'll see that I do link to basically like a one-slide PowerPoint presentation that you can look at, where I sort of do a little bit of explaining. It's going to look something like this. It walks us through Shakespeare's Sonnet 116. He didn't title them, he just numbered them. Let me not to the marriage of true minds. So it draws our attention to certain features of, right, the Shakespearean sonnet, whether it's the rhyme scheme indicated by the ABAB in the color coding here, the way the lines are grouped, right? So a group of 2 lines is a couplet. Taken as 4, it's a quatrain, quarter, right? 4. The whole thing is 14 lines, just like a Petrarchan sonnet, but the Petrarchan is organized differently and the rhymes work differently. And you can sort of follow the rhyme scheme, the breakdown of the quatrains here, that final couplet, right? The rhyming couplet, the summation of the poem, and then I think the most known but most challenging part of the sonnet form is the Iambic Pentameter, which I try to walk us through here. But in fact, the best example is in this sonnet by St. Vincent Millay, early 20th century American poet. What lips my lips have kissed and where and why is both the first line and it's the default title of that poem, but that is the line that is the perfect example to me of Iambic Pentameter. So 5 groups of an unstressed plus stressed syllable together, and of course to make it work you can't mispronounce words so that the stress falls on the right place, right? The trick is to use language that sounds natural but in fact follows this rhythmic pattern. So remember, we're looking for an unstressed plus stressed, unstressed plus stressed, unstressed plus stressed 5 times over. That's the penta part. So I'll exaggerate it for obvious reasons, right? What lips my lips have kissed and where and why. And if you count on your fingers, what 1 and 2 and 3 and where and 5. So the perfect sort of iambic pentameter. What you'll notice, of course, is that in each of these examples, even the Shakespearean one, there are moments where they sort of deviate from that really strict rhythmical pattern. So you don't want to get so locked into it that it just sounds robotic. And a very bad reading of Shakespeare will be like the one that I just did, that emphasizes it so much that it sounds totally unnatural. So we don't need to get too much into like the exact specifics of the form here. We'll kind of pick that up in our next unit, Unit 4. And so the assignment here has us engaging with the sonnet form in the way that I think is most effective, actually hearing it rather than trying to like mathematically count it out. So the reading assignment has you looking at a bunch of them. Read them out loud. One will probably catch your ear more than other ones do, whether it's because of the language or the way the rhythm falls or some of the words that are used. And then I'm going to ask that you record yourself doing it. You don't have to be physically on camera. You can just record like blank nothing. You could record your screen if you wanted to just talk into a webcam. Use your phone, whatever you want to do. And then post that recording, even if it's a video file, post it to like YouTube or SoundCloud. Remember, because we all have Google accounts, we can use YouTube. Go to youtube.com, sign in with your Google stuff. YouTube is a Google product. Load in your file, and then post it to the discussion board. So we'll actually be able to hear each other's sonnets. And then, of course, we have the responding part, where we clearly don't want to be like critical of someone's reading or, oh, you mispronounced that word or whatever. We want to really celebrate the interesting choices that people have made and the maybe interesting visual things that they've done, or whatever positive thing that we can find that's going on there. If you have technical questions, by all means be in touch with me, but do that soon. Don't wait again until that late on the due date to be in touch and say, oh, I don't know how to do that, or I can't do that. It's okay if you don't, but let me know now, not right a long time from now. Okay, so Unit 2, finishing up this part. Unit 3, jumping into sonnets, and we'll actually pick that up again in Unit 4. As always, if you have any questions or comments, be in touch with me, and I will get back with you as soon as I can.